I realise that this is a session in which we're supposed to be looking forward. Unfortunately, my professional difficulty here is that I'm a historian, so I end up going back to go forward. So, I mean, bear with me as I do that. And I mean, I'd really just like to sort of highlight 2 or 3 themes from the day's discussions. One of which has to do with the term secularism and the different meanings given to this term in different national contexts, different state contexts, has come up earlier in the day, both in discussions in France and on Algerians in France, and also in the different forms that the politics of the veil take in different countries. And I want to say a word about the history of the politics of secularism in the United Kingdom and how that bears on what we've been talking about. It is simply not correct, he says, as a historian who knows the truth, it is not correct to say that secularism began with Enlightenment atheistical thinkers. The politics of secularism in the UK began with Protestants outside of the Church of England. Amen. It was not an anti-religious movement. That might be a good thing or a bad thing, but it was not. It was a movement which wanted the state to be a religious-free zone. It was in favour of the disestablishment of the Church of England, and it was against what we have come to call faith schools. It was against state-funded religious education. So how did we end up here if this is what secularism was? And I think that the answer to that question has a lot to say about how we understand multiculturalism and its relationship to faith, to different faiths in the UK now. Because one of the dynamics behind multiculturalism has been the way in which the Anglican Church has shared its privileges with other religious minorities as a way of retaining its own privileges. This is the origin of the voluntary school system, which in the 1870s and in the 1902 Education Act, which are the origins of the faith schools today. And first of all, Catholic schools, and then Jewish schools, and more recently a variety of other schools in disproportionately small numbers to their representation in the population as a whole, have taken money from the state to establish their own schools, and this is then used as a way of bolstering the position of the Anglican Church in the state more widely. So it's very important to see that this is not an argument saying that multiculturalism is inherently conservative, but the particular model of multiculturalism that has developed in the United Kingdom has an important conservative dynamic to it, a conservative dynamic both in terms of society in the UK as a whole, in which the privileges of the Church of England are entrenched, and a conservative dynamic in the context of the minority communities within which certain leaders and certain groups are given money and recognition by the state, and in that way their own position is further entrenched. I think that this story I've just told extremely briefly, I think has a bearing on one of the key oppositions which has cropped up through the day today. And this opposition has been between those of us who have emphasized the ways in which a legacy of racism, colonialism, exclusion, and Islamophobia bears on minority groups within the UK today, and others have emphasized the ways in which that focus which I've just mentioned obscures power relations and hierarchies inside of the minority communities. And the ways in which that obscures other forms of disadvantage. It seems to me that the greatest lesson that I draw from today's discussions, which I have found consistently interesting, consistently engaging, but has left me with this final sense of dissatisfaction, which is to say that we need to develop forms of understanding, both of how we got here and of what we should do now, which combine these two perspectives. It is not an either-or between emphasizing racism, exclusion, Islamophobia, the legacy of colonialism, or talking about hierarchies, sexism, economic privilege, entrenched institutional privilege inside of minority communities. We need to understand both in a dynamic interaction, and only in that way will we be able to stand a chance of breaking free of them. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot.